I'm John Banther, and this is Classical Breakdown. From WETA Classical in Washington, we are your guide to classical music. In this episode, I'm joined by WETA Classical's Evan Keely, and we're exploring a work that was more consequential than you realize, Joseph Haydn's Trumpet Concerto. On the surface, it seems like an ordinary work that doesn't push boundaries, but in 1800 it was revolutionary as an audience heard a trumpet played in a way that seemed impossible. We get into the details as to why the work was so significant, why it's included in auditions, what to listen for across different interpretations, and why it feels like we are missing Haydn's adventurous spirit today. We always try, Evan, don't we, to get to the music as soon as possible because that's what we're here for, right? To learn about music. But of course, there's also context that we learn as well. And this is an episode that will require some context, won't it, into, why this concerto from 1796 is so significant, or even why we consider it the first trumpet concerto, because there's so many things that I think we're missing without the context.
Right, and we could really go down a whole rabbit hole of lots of technical aspects of the instrument for which this was written and the history of the development of brass instruments. And it's really fascinating to explore how these mechanical inventions have been an aspect of the development of this music.
Yes. Now, we consider this to be like the first concerto for the trumpet in 1796, even though Torelli, for example, wrote quote-unquote trumpet concertos in the previous decades. But in those, the trumpet doesn't even play in some of those slow tunes. And that instrument of Torelli's time could not play a chromatic scale. It had no valves, and this is one of the first things we learned in our trumpet episode with Chris Gecker. You were limited to a particular key. You had to play, diatonically. Not even all of those notes would sound evenly or very pretty or necessarily in tune. There were a lot of challenges with it. So in order to play notes in what we would call a normal register on the natural Baroque era trumpet, we had to have the instrument be twice as long as the contemporary trumpet of today, and that's because of the overtone series. If you have a C trumpet, the lowest note you can play without valves is C. And then the next natural note you can play without valves above that is an octave higher, a C. Then it gets a little smaller, a perfect fifth to a G, then a perfect fourth, C, major third, E. So as you go up, you eventually get to a range where you're able to play in whole steps without valves. And it's this range where you find the Baroque repertoire of Torelli and also Bach. This is the range that you find it written very high up on a very long instrument. So this meant it was difficult, unwieldy, and very fatiguing. That's the big part. It was fatiguing to play. But of course, Evan, humans, as humans do, you practice something diligently, you do get better. And some people got really, really, really good. And that's why we have some of the few incredible parts like Bach's Brandenburg Concerto No. 2.
Right, the Brandenburg Concerto No. 2, Johann Sebastian Bach, probably the most familiar trumpet work for, before this Haydn concerto. And, of course, lots of trumpet in ensembles. You think about the B minor Mass or Handel's Water Music. We certainly know trumpets in this music. And they're all, like you said, they're always playing very high. And the original trumpets of that era were very difficult to play in tune. As you pointed out, John, a lot of these instrumentalists worked very hard and got really good at it. You can find these performances on the internet, or you go to concerts or historically informed performance. You'll see these older instruments, these very long trumpets. Even a lot of those nowadays have holes bored in them.
Yeah.
There's no valves, there's no keys, there's no pistons or any of that stuff. But even that's a little bit cheating. But, we also want the instruments to sound good. We want to enjoy the performance. And, even the instrumentalists of today, like our forefathers and foremothers, our forebears, worked hard to play well. And you'll certainly see that in historically informed performance on period instruments today.
And I'm glad you brought up the whole bit about, you'll see people playing today and they have little holes drilled in some of them, but they're not like a key or a piston or anything like that. And it's cheating, but we need to do it. It makes certain notes resonate or sound in tune. It's not like pushing down the second valve and now you can play F sharp. It facilitates things to make it more manageable for people today, and what people expect from the sound as well.
Sure, sure.
So what on earth does all of this have to do, this natural trumpet stuff, with Haydn's concerto? Well, as you might have guessed, you cannot play this concerto on a natural trumpet, not even the one with the little holes in it to help you play a certain note better. You can't do it. But the valve itself would not be invented for a few decades. And this brings us as to why he wrote it. It was his trumpet friend Anton Weidinger who was experimenting with what he called keyed trumpets. These don't have valves, but rather holes, larger ones, placed around the instrument that would open or close based off of 5 to 7 keys that you would operate with your right hand, kind of like paddles, similar to a saxophone or a flute. This was a huge improvement. Now you could play chromatically. Now you could play melodies lower on the instrument. It's still more unwieldy than a modern trumpet, and the key trumpet, that's what we're hearing now. It has a bit of a sharper edge. You can force it to become more bright more quickly, but it's because of this instrument's brand new ability and Haydn's friend that the concerto was written in 1796 and then premiered in 1800. And we have an advertisement too, because that also, I think, illuminates some things about the situation at the time. And sometimes you see it called organized trumpet, if you're going to be reading some historical theses and stuff. Okay, Evan, now we can jump into the first movement with all of that. And the opening, we already have stuff right here, because this will sound different from concert to concert. And this is something people often don't notice. It's one of the few rare concertos I know where the soloist will just skip the written first notes, which is an E flat below the staff. And then there's like this little martial figure a couple times a few bars later. It's not the main tune, so some people totally skip those notes. And wait for the main line. And some people, like in this case that we're hearing now, Rolf Smedvig, the late Rolf Smedvig, he actually skips both of the parts. And he actually plays the first trumpet part in the orchestra from the front of the stage, like maybe up an octave. So already at the beginning, people do things differently. Alison Balsam, she plays it exactly as written. Sergei Nakaryakov, he skips both. And Tina Ting Helseth, whose recording we're going to hear mostly in this episode, she also skips both. But this also reappears at the very end of the concerto in the final seconds and also the final moments of this episode, where trumpet players don't play exactly what's written. And a question that we should be asking ourselves with context is, well, why is Haydn writing opening lines for the solo trumpet like this? Because this sounds kind of like actually what the natural trumpet was doing before. Little calls, a fanfare. This is the first performance, and this, Evan, I think would have been noticed by the audience, that the trumpet comes in and it's just kind of playing the usual random, martial stuff that you would expect. People would have noticed this because of how this concert was advertised. Haydn was at the height of his fame. Anton Weidinger was his great trumpet player. And maybe, Evan, you can read how this was advertised to the people, what they could expect.
Yeah, advertising was just as much a part of life in the late 18th century as it is for us today. Obviously, we have different media, but, Haydn was a big ticket draw.
Yeah.
And concert promoters were eager to capitalize on that. So you have this very, excited language in this advertisement for this concert in 1800, this first concerto for this new instrument. And it says, this is what the advertisement actually says: presenting to the world for the first time. I feel like I have to read this like a
little bit, yeah.
like a commercial. Presenting to the world for the first time so that it may be judged, an organized trumpet, which Weidinger has invented and brought after 7 years of hard and expensive labor to what he believes may be described as perfection. It contains several keys and will be displayed in a concerto specially written for this instrument by Herr Joseph Haydn, Doctor of Music. I mean, come one, come all, right? This is almost like a carnival. But this is a very exciting thing that they're advertising here. Joseph Haydn, the most respected composer in Europe, is writing a concerto for a new instrument.
Yeah.
Wow, that is exciting. I would have gone.
Yeah.
Ad would have worked on me.
And so you show up and you're in the hall and you're waiting to hear this thing, and then you hear these first entrances, and it's kind of like, I imagine someone might lean over to someone and say, "Yeah, I told you this was a waste of
Yeah,
time."
no, this is false advertising. What's the
Yeah.
big deal?
But then moments later, everything changes when the main tune comes in. Now, the main tune, Evan, this probably sounds so normal and mundane to all of us, but this would have been the moment where it was a bit of a shock for some listeners because they're hearing the trumpet for the first time play a scale-like melody in its lower and middle registers. Remember, this was only possible much higher up on the unwieldy natural trumpet. Now he's playing this stuff like a clarinet might play.
Yeah, it's so interesting. This very opening, like you said, John, the very first phrases that the soloist has, which, as you pointed out rightly, performance practice varies right up to our time, whether or not the soloist actually plays what's written, but it's a little quirky, right? To have the soloist in any concerto come in right away. You think about like a Mozart piano concerto, there's a whole exposition with the orchestra, and then the piano comes in. And that's typical. Haydn's not doing something entirely unprecedented here, but it's a little odd that the soloist has passages at the very beginning. Maybe he's so eager to show off. Oh boy, look at this new thing. And yet the writing at the very beginning, as you pointed out, sounds an awful lot like a natural trumpet. So maybe he's trying to sort of psych us out like, oh, here's a sort of normal thing you'd expect to hear, but wait, there's more. And so, you have this kind of this humor for which Haydn is known. And then, like you said, once the main tune comes in and you have this chromaticism, you have these natural, these notes that a trumpet, no one had ever heard a trumpet play these tones before. I think even among people in the audience who weren't musicians and weren't sitting there saying, well, the overtone series, you and I can geek out on that, or Chris Gecker, or people that know these things understand the more the technical aspects. But even for someone who's not steeped in that, they're hearing notes on a trumpet. They've all heard trumpets their whole life, and the trumpet playing that low, playing a scale, is something no one has ever heard before. And even just watching the performance, here's a trumpet with keys on it. If you're sitting in the first row or whatever, you can see this person fingering these keys like a clarinet or a flute or an oboe. Wait, what is this? So this had to have been very strange and very exciting for the audience. We can guess that Weidinger sounded really good.
Yeah.
I think he worked very hard to get good sounds out of this instrument. There's certainly contemporary accounts that suggest he was really a pleasure to listen to. And, you can almost imagine Haydn, writing this out and giggling to himself, at last I can write for the trumpet the same way I write for the oboe or the violin. Whee! He's having a great time. But this is the same composer who was perfectly willing to write concertos for the lira organizzata. The king of Naples liked to play this weird hurdy-gurdy instrument, long since defunct. He wrote 6 concertos in the 1760s for this weird instrument that nobody today even knows what it really sounded like. But so Haydn was an adventurer. He had an adventurous spirit. He was willing to try things. That's one of the reasons he was so great. And one of the reasons he was able to be the great innovator that he was, father of the symphony, father of the string quartet. Let's try this new sound and see what it's like, is his attitude. And he writes this concerto, which is this masterpiece that everyone loves. It's one of his best-known works. And this is just a tribute to his adventurous spirit that he was able to create this.
And that's actually one of the biggest main points, I think, about this entire thing is what you just mentioned, his adventurous spirit. And I think that also points to what we are doing or not doing today, which I think is very important, but also very depressing, actually. Don't let me forget. I will mention that later on as we get to it, the context of that. But just speaking about this opening, people will play it as, well, they would tend to play it. Alison Balsam, who just retired from public performance last year, her bread and butter has been, Baroque and classical and early Romantic repertoire, all of that repertoire. So she's playing the Haydn, as it's written. As I would expect someone like to play it. people like Sergei Nakaryakov, he was 15 when he recorded that. A lot of people, when they record this, it's like they're 15, 16, 17, or in their early 20s. It's one of the first things that they do. And so some people, yeah, they don't do it. Some people do. And I imagine some of this chromaticism would have had people, making some kind of noise in the audience as they hear it for the first time. And we're going to hear mostly Tina Ting. She is one of the greats of my generation. And she's playing on a modern E-flat trumpet with valves, not a keyed trumpet. More about the E-flat in a bit. But she has one of the most fluid, rich, and fat sounds on the trumpet I have ever heard. This is something you don't get on the key trumpet, but especially with brass, a lot of the details are in like the articulations, the transitions, and especially the ends of notes. There's an effortless and playfulness here that she is able to do that Weidinger probably was not able to do with his instruments. So I think even today, skipping or not skipping, Haydn would be very excited, as you would say, that we're playing at this.
I agree with you about Weidinger, and I totally agree with you, John, about Tina Ting Helseth. Really fantastic musician, incredibly skilled player. The tone, I agree with what you said about her tone, the phrasing, so exquisite. This performance she made, she was 20 years old in 2007 when she made this recording. So as you were saying, a lot of trumpeters early in their careers record and perform this concerto. I really love the way she brings out the spirit of Haydn. There's this joyful quality. It's very noble. It's very dignified. But there's also that wonderful humor. That's such a marvelous characteristic of Haydn's music. She brings that out so subtly with such finesse. And, she's just an incredible musician. Recently, a couple of years ago, beat cancer.
Yeah.
I just have such respect for her, and this performance is such a joy to listen to.
And as you listen, something you'll notice is that this is not a technically advanced concerto compared to, what pretty much anything trumpet players are performing or writing today, and I'll include something that really demonstrates that. So actually, if someone is going to music school today, they have played this in high school. Like you've played it and performed it in high school, probably and almost always on a B-flat trumpet. It's bigger, it's more unwieldy, but there's the same thing with my instrument, and it's always like, learn it on that. Learn this difficult, weird thing. It will help you in many, many ways. So this actually presents a new challenge for players today on these new, extremely tolerant instruments, and that is any deficiency in your playing will be immediately known. It's just immediately known.
Yeah, no place to hide.
There is nowhere to hide. So that is the reason why this concerto, it is on every single principal trumpet audition for an orchestra, even though it's not technically advanced at all. But every single thing will be immediately known when you play it.
And I really wonder if that was a deliberate choice on Haydn's part to write a solo part for this concerto that's not especially virtuosic. Compare it to, for example, his cello concertos. You have this more conspicuously virtuosic writing for the soloist in those concertos. On the other hand, I think that by the end of the 18th century, a lot of concertos don't necessarily offer the kind of superhuman pyrotechnics that were more fashionable in the Baroque era, or for that matter in the 19th century. You think about Pablo de Sarasate or Niccolo Paganini, for example, or into the 20th with the Sergei Prokofiev piano concerto. Like these almost unplayable pieces that we could think of. You and I did an episode not too long ago about the Sibelius violin concerto.
Yeah.
One of the most difficult violin concertos ever.
Mm-hmm.
You don't really see that as much in the late 18th century. Think about the Mozart piano concerto, for instance. They're challenging, but they're not these wild, pyrotechnic flights of fancy. And this Haydn trumpet concerto, there are things about it that are quite difficult, like you were saying, John. But playing all the right notes isn't necessarily this superhuman feat if people are playing it when they're teenagers. I would say I agree with what you're saying. The principal difficulty, it's so popular. Every trumpet player on the face of the earth is expected to play it. Like you said, every audition, you gotta know this piece inside and out. And therefore, I would think, I mean, I'm not a brass player, I don't know, but I would think every trumpet player must be wondering, what can I bring to interpreting this that's going to be valuable? Everybody plays this piece. So it's just yet another trouble. Like, what am I going to offer that's going to, and of course, any wrong note, any phrase that isn't just so, like you said, it's just going to really stick out. But with all that in mind, I still wonder why this trumpet part isn't more demanding.
Hmm.
And maybe I would think surely one part of the answer to that question is that this is this new unknown instrument. Haydn
Hmm.
wants to write something appealing, but maybe wants to take some risks, but not too many. I'm not sure.
I think I think the last part is it. It's a new instrument. They don't know what they can do with it. It's like the first tuba concerto was in the 1950s. Today, I mean, we can do a million things more difficult. It's kind of like cars. The Model T, you turn at 20 miles an hour, you might as well hit the eject button.
Yeah.
Now you can drive a Porsche 911, at 115 miles an hour around a corner, or a large apex or something. So I think the technology, all of that is what allows us to play more difficult things now.
Sure.
But even for Haydn's time, you're right. There's a virtuosity to it, but it's not what we're going to see later on. Now, some of the virtuosity, I think it's actually written into some of the non-virtuosic sounding parts, like when you have um, these leaps around the instrument are hard on an instrument that's a little bit more unwieldy because you're trying to slot a note in a very small space.
Sure.
With a modern trumpet, I mean, it's like, opening a mailbox. You can put the note wherever you want. So when you have these large leaps, that is some virtuosity in itself. And the reason why I also choose Tina Ting and many, especially Scandinavian players, is because there's an ability to play in multiple registers, and it sounds like one. It does not sound high, it doesn't sound low.
Yeah.
There's a very natural
Doing
flow.
those leaps cleanly, in
Mhm.
tune, doing it with finesse, doing it artistically, a lot harder than it may seem.
We are only a few minutes into the concerto. I think this is the longest we've spent on a movement of something like this, but that's just because there is so much behind this that we just did not get, that we don't know today. The context is what I'm talking about. And then there's a cadenza. And we don't know what Weidinger played. We don't know anything about the concert, really, besides that advertisement. So we wonder what he played. But this is where you can hear people do all kinds of different things. Tina Ting, she starts off smooth and legato, and it kind of does what she does. She paints within the time period. Mostly, it gets very energetic, gets high, gets very low, goes to minor. Lots of double tonguing virtuosity added as well. And then the orchestra closes out the very, very last phrase of the cadenza. And it's by luck, Evan, right, that we even have this today. There is only the original manuscript that survived with it, no parts or anything. Things are scribbled. He scribbled things very quickly. So dynamics, articulation, there's even that issue of what did Haydn actually mean with some of these slurs or articulations here?
Yeah.
Because some of them change without reason.
Yeah, the inconsistencies are kind of maddening. You're right that we're very lucky to have a manuscript of this concerto, and this is a huge problem, of course, in really older music from any era. Certainly with Haydn, we see plenty of instances of it. You did an episode 22 of Classical Breakdown. Was that season 1 or season 2? I can't remember. You and James Jacobs had a conversation about the Cello Concerto No. 1, which was lost for almost 2 centuries or more,
Yeah.
and then rediscovered, and now it's, standard repertoire. It's a wonderful piece. Thank goodness we hear it so often. Lots of missing music with Haydn, who was very prolific, wasn't always careful about cataloging everything. And for that matter, there's lots of concertos and other pieces which were at one point attributed to Haydn, and we now believe someone else wrote them, or we don't know who wrote them.
Hmm.
The piano concertos, for instance, there's only three of them that we're really confident really are his, 3, 4, and 11. So I have all these other concertos which somebody else wrote, probably, or we're not sure. No doubt, however, who wrote this trumpet concerto,
Yeah.
but it could very easily have been lost to us.
Yes, because, well, the emphasis is on new music. It's a very fast and exciting field. And yeah, you're writing new music constantly, and things aren't necessarily cataloged because who has a key trumpet besides him in the next year or two? No one else is playing it. So, real quick on the E flat trumpet, this is what everyone, unless you're a high school student, this is what you're using to perform the concerto. And some people mistake it for a piccolo because if you think of like the typical trumpet with three valves, the tuning slide goes out towards the bell and then comes back. The E flat trumpet looks like you just ripped that part off, so it's like missing. So some people think it's a piccolo, but it has three valves, not four. E flat, and you're shortening that tube to raise it from say B flat to E flat. So that's just a little bit about that, and we will get into the second movement right after this. Okay, Evan, now we're getting into the second movement, and now thankfully there's less and less context needed, I think, as we go on. This is a beautiful movement. It's a slow 6/8. We're in A flat, and the violins introduce the main tune here before the soloist comes in. And I think we hear some hallmarks from Haydn's earlier time with some of the symphony development stuff we learned about things like a Mannheim sigh. We'll hear that in this music where there's like an emphasis on one note, and then you relax onto another note, like lower and da, da, that type of thing. And listen to Tina Ting's first entrance. It is such a simple line, but from the first vibration to the very last, her sound is, she has this completely suspended. And this type of flexibility and smoothness takes extraordinary practice. Any tension as you're standing in front of 2,000 people, and oh my goodness, you will feel it, you will hear it. And it's as if amidst all of that, she's handing you the most delicate thing, that just handing it to you.
Yeah, this performance is so excellent, and everything about it is so good. In the fast passages and the bright passages, staccato and so forth, she's really clear, and there's a brightness and a vitality to it. And in these slow lyrical passages, the phrasing is just so exquisite. From every single note, that the tone is so warm, and the way she ends phrases, such a good performance. I mean, just really, really extraordinary. It's worth mentioning again that in these Baroque trumpet concertos we started the episode talking about, it's not unusual for the trumpet to not play at all in the slow movement.
Yeah.
You're mentioning Torelli. Torelli wrote a lot of these trumpet pieces. In the Bach Brandenburg Concerto No. 2, the trumpet doesn't play in the slow movement. Leopold Mozart wrote a trumpet concerto years before for a natural trumpet. There, it starts with a slow movement. The trumpet does play there, which was maybe a little unusual for that time. So it seems like, it's not unprecedented for the trumpet to be playing in a slow movement, but it's a little bit more unusual. And it really makes sense to me that Haydn would want to show off the capabilities of this new instrument and Weidinger's skillful playing of it, we presume, by demonstrating not only its facility to play all the chromatic pitches and to play quickly, but that it could also be this very fine lyrical instrument. And, I would say mission accomplished. It's beautiful.
I actually wonder if this might have been more of a shock than the first movement, because the trumpet itself, as we learned, comes from all this military background and this martial fanfare stuff. And now you're hearing it in the slow movement when they would usually get a break to play something very high and fast in the third movement. Yeah, you're right. He's showing off what this can do what this instrument can do with something very soft. Hey, remember the natural trumpet? It sounded like a dying frog or something on something slow. Now you can do this. Yeah.
Well, another very exciting thing, so you can, of course, you have this instrument that's chromatic. It can play all the pitches, and that means you can change keys. A lot of these trumpet pieces from earlier had to stay in the same key because the limited number of notes that those instruments could play. Well, that problem is solved.
Yeah.
We have this chromatic trumpet. Any key change is possible. And so what happens in this slow movement, and really nothing unusual for the 1790s, the piece modulates from the tonic into, modulates up a minor third into the, in this case, rather unusual key of C flat major. Yes, that's a real key. I think the string players are glad that it's a slow movement. Hard to play stringed instruments in that key. No way a natural trumpet could do anything like that unless it's playing really, really high. And then how the heck do you play it in tune? And it's very, very strenuous on the player. So in this case, keeping everything in tune, playing all those pitches chromatically. Well, I mean, there's good reasons why you've never heard a piece like this for the trumpet before this.
And this is not a long movement. Like 2.5 minutes or so in, we get like the biggest utterance by the trumpet, and it's still not huge. It's still very delicate, but now it's bigger, and these are long phrases you have to manage. Even the carbon dioxide in your lungs, you have to manage that as well, because that can create tension in your chest. And there's a little coda that I think would have been so dreamy hearing it for the first time in 1800. And this is where I mentioned, like a clarinet. There's clarinet lines here, and I think I've read somewhere else talking about it, some people saying, oh, it's like a clarinet, the sound and the way it can play. That's what Haydn has brought. And I think it would have been really dreamy to hear this for the first time.
Yeah.
Like that.
I wonder, too, when reviewers of that era talking about it sounds like a clarinet, which is also a newish instrument in this era. I mean, it's undergoing developments at the end of the 18th century that think about the Mozart clarinet concerto, for example.
Yeah.
It's not like the instrument hadn't existed at all, but new possibilities with that instrument as well. So it's an exciting time in instrumental music in Western Europe.
Yeah, I think those two had like they occupied a similar type of, not brittle, but a brightness in the sound that they've since evolved away from. They're much darker in different directions.
Sure.
But we do have a review, Evan, speaking of reviews, not from 1800, but from a performance in 1802. I'll read this here. It says, "The Imperial Royal Court trumpeter, Mr. Weidinger of Vienna, gave us the opportunity of judging for ourselves his significant invention concerning the perfection of the trumpet, and at the same time of admiring his masterly playing. It is completely founded in fact that Mr. W. is fully conversant with all the half-tones lying within the compass of his instrument, and to such an extent that he plays running passages through them. Furthermore, the fear that we uttered on the occasion of the first reporting concerning his invention, that this instrument might thereby have lost something of its pompous character, has been completely refuted by Weidinger's public demonstrations. The instrument still possesses its full, penetrating tone, which is at the same time so gentle and delicate that not even a clarinet is capable of playing more mellowy." Now I'm remembering, that's maybe where I got the clarinet bit from. A couple of things here. This review is basically just outlining everything you've mentioned so far, Evan. And also, think about this. This is a review in a paper of a big city where there's like a huge arts culture, and the reporter is telling everyone, have no fear. The sound, the penetrating tone of the trumpet is still here. You don't see that today. No one is writing. There's a value of music and what is possible that is missing. Michael Andor Broder has gone from the Post, who wrote really well, some amazing reviews. So just to acknowledge, we've lost a lot in that respect.
Yes.
So that brings us to the third movement. And Evan, I understand that there's a lot of people who don't listen to this music, of course, but they associate this movement, with the TV show Squid Game, which is hilarious, but also sad. I mean, how do you explain that to Haydn? I watched, my wife Zena watched it, at least the first season, and I was there, and I saw bits, but it got intense. It was a bit for me. I was under the blanket with a dog. I don't know how Haydn would react to that.
Yeah, well, of course, you and I just did an episode for Classical Breakdown a few episodes ago about the theme from 2001.
Yeah.
Ha ha ha, right? So, I mean, people maybe don't know the context for this music. I was in high school when the film Platoon came out, and that introduced the Barber Adagio for strings to a wider audience. And I hadn't seen the movie, so I was sitting in the choir room one day. I was a choir nerd in high school, and I'm sitting at the piano and I'm kind of playing some chords from the Barber Adagio, and somebody is sitting near me and says, "Oh yeah, that's a really good movie," and I'm like, "What?" Yeah. So, but if people are hearing the Barber Adagio because they saw this movie, or they're hearing the Haydn Trumpet Concerto because they're watching Squid Game, maybe it'll make more people curious and interested. Like, wow, that music was really cool. What is that? Oh, I heard a podcast episode about that. John Banther and Evan Keely from WETA were talking about that piece. I want to learn more about this guy Haydn. So, classical music is for everyone. Not everyone's going to like it, but it's for everyone. And, if a TV show or movie gets you interested, follow that passion, I would say.
And actually, like the first movement, this opens with a simple tune on the violins, and then when the trumpet comes in, she actually plays it a little bit differently. The articulation, you'll notice, it is different. It's everything is tongue versus some of the slurring of the strings. And now it is in this movement that the trumpet takes on more virtuosic lines for the time period, but also for the whole thing. This is where it gets into the fantastical nature of it.
Yeah, we have these wonderful trills, so there's definitely some virtuosity here, and it shows that it can do pretty much anything that any instrument can do.
Yeah, because the trills, without valves, you have to do it with your lips, which is what all brass players have to learn, but that's way up high in a register where you can do it. Now you're doing trills using the keys in various registers where it was not possible.
Yeah.
And so I think with that, there's a lot of passing lines back and forth between like trumpet and violin or flute or whatever that was done in a way that people had just not heard before. The trumpet was something that came in kind of abruptly. It had this fanfare, it was declaring something. Now here it is playing and passing lines as if it was a clarinet or an oboe, and passing lines with the violin section. He'll still include some martial moments, of course, and there's a bit of Haydn humor as well, Evan, I think, because this is a short movement, and there's no cadenza, but there's a fermata towards the beginning that sounds like, well, something's about to happen. Everyone holds a note, then there's a rest, and the trumpet soloist carries the sound over the rest. With like some anticipation, and then jumps in. Sometimes sounds kind of random how they come back.
Yeah, I love that moment though. I mean, it's like you said, it's such a Haydn thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, there's the symphony where I forget. I think it's in C, and it sounds like it's over, and there's like 8 seconds of silence.
Yes,
I have for sure when I first started years ago when I was on air, I came in at that spot, even though I knew and I said don't do it.
Yeah, been there, done that. Oh. Welcome to my world.
Yeah.
Oh.
So this is the stuff that Haydn was doing.
He loves to trick us like that.
Yeah, and it's something that people would have already known about him or just understood. This is it's a style. It's Haydn.
And I always like to say Haydn. It always feels like he's laughing with us, not laughing at us. Maybe if you're a radio announcer and you're live and you come in before the piece is over, you feel like the joke's on you. But it never feels malicious. It's always like this joy and generosity. And, we have this modulation to the subdominant, really the easiest modulation in Western music, like falling out of bed. Not so easy with the natural trumpet, though. and then this relative minor, there's a minor passage. Again, everything being in tune, everything being, nice and clear. The chromaticism of the keyed trumpet makes all this possible, and just like it would be with a violin concerto or an oboe concerto or a keyboard concerto.
And still there's moments of it doesn't seem virtuosic, but just playing, some of these half notes or quarter notes in different registers very cleanly with the exact same sound and everything. That is difficult. That's also part of, your principal trumpet audition.
Yes.
Because there's so much music that has you in all different registers, and you have to be able to play it. Now we get to the ending and back to something that we actually did right at the start. We look at how, some people are skipping or changing some of the music here. So actually, I won't say what people are doing. We'll just take a listen real quick to two particular recordings. First, here's the final moments of Tina Ting. Now listen how Alison Balsam plays it. So, if you didn't hear it, there is a difference in the register. Tina Ting is actually playing it an octave above where it's written, actually the last several measures, and it sounds very brilliant, bright, and just exciting. And Alison Balsam, she's playing it as written, which is, it sounds an octave lower than Tina Ting. It's also exciting, but in a totally different way, because playing low and in tune on these instruments, that was also difficult. And actually, Sergei Nakarikov, I'll include his cadenza, because he plays super low notes. And that's kind of like, yeah, I can do that. Can you? Can you play this evenly and then play super high right after that? Just fine. So people do it a little bit different. I don't know exactly the reasons other than, it sounds fun. Like there's no historical reason to do it, I imagine.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. Yeah, as I was saying earlier, everyone plays this concerto, so putting your distinctive stamp on it has got to be very stressful, even for great players like Alison Balsam or Tina Ting Helseth. It's 18th century music. It's the end of the 18th century. We're still in an era in European music where the score is not this sacrosanct thing that must be obeyed, which comes later, and certainly a characteristic of the 20th and I guess the 21st centuries. This idea that the concerto soloist must play exactly what the composer wrote, if that's even happening at all in this era, I think that's more of a 19th century idea. Concertos are much more of a showcase for improvisation in the 18th century. Even toward the end of the century, all of the Beethoven piano concertos except for the last one, you have these places where you're supposed to do a cadenza. It was you and I did an episode about the Fifth Piano Concerto of Beethoven, and he writes the cadenza out in the first movement. Non si fa una cadenza. Don't make a cadenza. Play this. That was unusual in 1809. So I think that Haydn and Weidinger would not be rolling in their graves or gasping in horror because somebody took something up an octave or put in a little trill somewhere or whatever. I think that's in the spirit of the era. And it's also in the spirit of we live in an attention economy in the 21st century, and you want to get attention, you want to do something interesting. I don't feel that it's disrespectful or inappropriate. I think it's fun to play around with the score a little bit, and I think it's quite appropriate.
I also have no problems really when people are making artistic decisions. And you're right, it was a time of transition. The Baroque era had so much improvisation that was expected and not written in. It was things that you were just expected to know, which we'll even do today. When I play in brass quintet and we do Renaissance or Baroque music, trumpet players will start doing stuff on the repeats. That is not written at all. And now we're getting into the classical period towards Haydn where, yeah, everything is getting written out exactly. And now we're entering an era of like the soloist, where the soloist will just start screwing around and messing things up. I think was it Beethoven's violin concerto? It was a disaster because like the soloist didn't have enough time to practice it and then started like improvising, doing random things with it to save his own reputation,
Yeah.
that type of thing. So it's a very interesting time of that whole idea of written music versus expanding on it or even improvisation.
It was a gradual process, I think. People didn't wake up in the morning on some day in 1800 and say, okay, no more improvising. Let's just play what's written. It evolved over time. We're in 1796 when this concerto was written. We're coming to the end of the era where improvisation is sort of the key aspect of performance and getting more into a stricter interpretation of what's on the page. But it's in process.
And if you've made it all the way to the end here, I appreciate you because I want to mention something I talked about earlier, and that's just the adventurousness of Haydn, and then seeing a review of someone talking about the trumpet in a way where there's an expectation that the audience knows what the trumpet sounds like, or should not sound like. All of this stuff is brand new and adventurous, and it's only here because we have people who are willing to take risks and do things. All these instruments were brand new at one point. They were all invented, and they all took people to take time and be willing to make bad art. If we don't let artists make potentially bad art, we've lost it. We lose everything. So for myself, I look back at the last century and you think about, what new instruments have come out and what concertos have been written for them. You do not see a lot of electric bass solos, fretless bass solos. There's some guitar concertos. There's I meant to look it up, the Water Concerto. I forget who wrote that. It's amazing. That's also ancient. That's like some of the first music, making percussion with water or pitched using vases and stuff that you create in pottery. So that's all to say, it's very disappointing when you look back and you see we've abandoned it. And then you look at something like rap, one of the biggest genres, maybe the most impactful, I think, of the last century. You will hear harpsichord, you will hear flute, you will hear violin, you'll hear an orchestra, and people don't do it. The Royal Concerto Orchestra did a show, it was like in 2010 on Konininacht, Queen's Night, with like Die Antwoord. That's a whole nother story, but it's a like a rap rave duo. That was amazing. But that's like the one time you hear stuff like that happen.
I agree with what you're saying, John. The idea of being adventurous means, among other things, a willingness to take risks.
Mm-hmm.
That is, almost by definition, the spirit of adventurousness. You're willing to risk failure.
Yeah.
And to learn from it rather than just being embarrassed by it.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree that with any creative endeavor, certainly in music, there always needs to be that willingness to take risks. It's one of the things, as we were saying, that makes Haydn one of the great composers. He was willing to take risks. He was willing to fail. When he did fail, he learned from it. He adapted. Here's 1796. He writes this concerto for this brand new instrument. Whole thing could have been a flop. This is Haydn's most popular concerto.
Yeah.
By far. I mean, other concertos get played by Haydn. The cello concertos are pretty popular, as well they should be. This is the best-known concerto by Haydn.
Easily.
It's also his last concerto. I don't know why that he died in 1809. He lives for more than a decade after this, but he stops. And then in the late 1790s, he starts writing oratorios.
Yeah.
And the Creation comes out and so forth. This is a whole new direction for him because, again, he's willing to take risks. He's willing to experiment. He's willing to try new things. He happened to be a stupendous genius, so that helped. But the willingness to embrace an adventurous spirit, which is a spirit that's willing to absorb the disappointments and embarrassments of failure and to learn from them, is absolutely essential in any creative endeavor. And I hope that we can continue to encourage that in music and in all realms of human endeavor.
Yes, because as we commodify it and everything that's we're seeking out the percentage of the quarter, how can we make this work the next season, and we miss a lot. So I hope everyone can use this as a jumping off point to other concertos, contemporary, interesting, well, this is all interesting, but modern things happening today as well. There's works like one we're hearing by Ellen Zwilich, an American composer, or maybe Alan Vizzuti. That's a name that people probably don't know, but if you like the trumpet, he's like he is the Sarasate of the trumpet today. That's what it is. But that's all I have for this concerto, Evan. What about you?
I think it's a piece that is worth celebrating. We all hear it many, many times. It's very familiar. It's easy to take it for granted. And this conversation for me, John, I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to dive deeper myself. I always learn a great deal being your guest on this podcast. So thank you again. And thank you, Joseph Haydn and Anton Weidinger, for having that adventurous spirit that gave us this glorious masterpiece.
And I'll also include videos of performances on the show notes page at classicalbreakdown.org. Thanks for listening to Classical Breakdown, your guide to classical music. For more information on this episode, visit the show notes page at classicalbreakdown.org. You can send me comments and episode ideas to classicalbreakdown@weta.org. And if you enjoyed this episode, leave a review in your podcast app. I'm John Banther. Thanks for listening to Classical Breakdown from WETA Classical.